Rupert, I'd like to go back to one of my questions from this morning, having to do with prayer. And I'm really wondering what your thoughts are about prayer.
Okay, yes, I remember there was a...
And I'd like to add something to that after the healing question. I think it's connected, but often people pray for healings for others, or they do Reiki energy work, or Qigong. Do those have, I think I'm combining these, I don't mean to make them separate, but does prayer and does energy work have healing qualities? And the whole concept of distant healing. Am I making this too complicated?
Well, there's prayer and healing. Yes, let's go back to what we said about all finite minds are precipitations in and of the same infinite field of consciousness. Therefore, all finite minds are intimately connected. So therefore, there is nothing to suggest that what takes place in one finite mind reverberates into the infinite field of consciousness in which it appears and touches and therefore affects other finite minds. And because there is no distance or space in consciousness, then for consciousness, whether that takes place between people sitting next door to each other or living on the other side of the world doesn't make any difference at all. So yes, the healing at a distance is only an extraordinary phenomenon from a materialistic point of view. From a point of view that believes that there are as many different consciousnesses as there are bodies, and that each body is a self-contained unit, that there's no connection between the bodies and even less between the consciousnesses that are supposedly residing inside the body. So from that point of view, distance healing is extraordinary. I mean, from that point of view, even having a conversation with someone is extraordinary. How on earth do these two, through what medium do these two people communicate? But distance healing is an extraordinary phenomenon from that point of view. But from the point of view when we start with consciousness, and consciousness is obviously the place to start, because consciousness is our primary experience. If we start with consciousness, and if we see that all minds are appearances in the same consciousness, then yes, communication at a distance is to be expected. But going on to what you asked about prayer, if we believe that we are a temporary finite self living inside the body, we will, or basically made out of mind living inside the body, we will by definition feel that all of this is a world made out of matter. So our experience will appear as comprising these two essential ingredients, mind on the inside and matter on the outside. Now when the mind looks at all this stuff on the outside, it notices that it's coming and going all the time. So the natural question of the mind to ask is, wow, where does it all come from? Who created it? Where does it go when it disappears? So the mind then conceives something that is vaster than all of this universe, that created the universe that it sees. And it calls that God. So in fact, what the mind doesn't know is what the separate self or the mind-made self doesn't realize is that its idea of God is created as an image of its idea about itself. It is a reflection. The separate self's idea of God is a reflection of its idea about itself. Because it doesn't question its idea about itself, because it thinks, I am a separate self, I am a temporary finite consciousness. Therefore, it doesn't question its belief in God. So actually, from the separate self's point of view, there is not just mind and matter. There is mind, matter, and God. So as a concession to the separate self, we can say, yes, there is some benefit to devoting yourself to or praying to that infinite reality out there called God. Why? Because doing so expands oneself beyond the separate self. It, to a certain extent, attenuates the ego. It gives the ego something to surrender to, something that is bigger than itself to surrender to lose itself in. So from that point of view, it is valid. However, that conception of God can only remain if the separate self remains. So at some stage, our idea of God has to evolve. Because when the separate self disappears, its God will disappear with it. Its idea of God will disappear with it. So the God that the separate self is really seeking lies at its origin. God is not out there beyond everything the separate self knows. God lies at the source of the separate self, prior to everything that it knows. So the true prayer is turning the attention away from anything objective, even if the object towards which we are turning is the greatest possible object, that is God. God is the largest object the human mind can conceive. If the mind of the separate self wants to go beyond this object-facing knowledge, it has to turn in the other direction towards its source. And that is the highest prayer, even higher than directing your attention to God. It is directing your attention towards the source of I. In fact, this is what is meant in the Christian mysticism. The practice of the presence of God is what Ramana Maharshi called sinking the mind into the heart. Returning the mind to its source in pure awareness. That is the practice of the presence of God. What is it that lies at the source of the mind? Being aware. Just the simple, non-objective experience of being aware. What is the name that being aware has in our language? It is called I, or I am. When we say I in its pure form is simply the experience of being aware. That is why I am is God's first name. It is the name of God. So the true prayer, the ultimate prayer, the highest prayer is to allow the attention to sink deeper and deeper into its source. And as the attention sinks into its source, it is in most cases gradually divested of its limitations. And at some point it stands revealed as that source.
So when one says, I am that I am,
Yes.
that's the essence of what you're...
Yes, that's exactly what is meant by that. Yes. Yes. I am the knowing with which I know that I am. Or I am that I am. That is the highest prayer, to be that, because you can't think that. It is prior to thought. Thought arises out of that, but in its essential nature, it is without thought. It is just pure being, pure aware being. To be that knowingly is the highest prayer. To rest in that and as that.